Flattery Accounting Services pays $2,000 per month for a tax preparation software license. In addition, variable charges incurred average $9 for every tax return the firm prepares. Part A states, determine the total cost and the cost per unit if the firm expects to prepare the following number of tax returns in March. So to start off, we are to calculate total cost. And total cost is our variable cost plus our fixed cost component. Total costs, again, variable costs plus fixed costs. So our variable costs plus our fixed costs. So to start off with our variable costs, we need to figure out the number of tax returns. Well, first, under our number one assumption, we're assuming we are going to produce 200 units. So that is 200 tax returns. We then want to multiply that times the variable cost per tax return. So $9 per tax return, or $9 per unit. Together, the $9 per tax return times 200 tax returns is our variable cost. We then have to add our fixed costs. So the fixed costs that were provided to us in the problem was $2,000 per month. So we needed to add $2,000. And multiplying our 200 tax returns times $9 per tax return, we come up with our variable costs. We then add our $2,000 of fixed costs to come up with a total of $3,800 of cost. So this is again in assumption 1, where we're assuming we have 200 tax returns. Now let's determine the cost per unit. So if we have total costs of $3,800 and we divide that by the number of units, in this case we are producing 200 tax returns, we can come up with the cost per tax return. In this case, that is $19 per tax return. So this is assumption 1. Our total cost is $3,800 and our cost per tax return, or cost per unit, is $19. Let's take a look at assumption 2. So assumption 2, going back to this problem, we are now going to assume that in March we produce 500 tax returns, or 500 units. And we're asked to calculate total cost, and we're asked to calculate our cost per tax return. So we had to go through the same steps as we did before here for 200 tax returns. So again, our assumption has changed. We are now going to produce 500 tax returns. And we need to calculate total cost. Well, we can follow along with our total cost calculation up above. We start off with the number of tax returns, and now that is 500 tax returns. We multiply that times the cost per tax return, that's our variable cost per tax return, of $9. We then add our fixed cost. Our fixed cost was $2,000 per month, regardless of how many tax returns we produce. That cost must be covered. So calculating that, $9 per tax return times 500 tax returns plus $2,000, we should come up with $6,500. Similarly, to come up with the cost per tax return, we start off with the total cost, $6,500, and we divide that by the number of tax returns. Well, in our second assumption here, we are now using 500 tax returns. So $6,500 divided by 500 tax returns, we come up with $13 per tax return, or unit. Assumption 3, we have 800 tax returns. So we're going to calculate total cost. And total cost is 800 tax returns times that same $9 per tax return, plus the same exact fixed cost, $2,000, we come up with our total. So 800 times 9 plus 2,000, we have a total of $9,200. Let's scroll down here. So starting off with our total cost, we have $9,200. We divide that by the number of tax returns now is 800 tax returns. And we come up with our cost per tax return, and that is now $11.50 per tax return. So when we were producing 200 tax returns, we have a total cost of $3,800 and a cost per unit of $19. When we are assuming we produce 500 tax returns, our total cost was $6,500. Our cost per unit is $13. When we are assuming 800 tax returns, our total cost is $9,200 and our cost per tax return is $11.50. Part B, why does the cost per unit change in 1, 2, and 3 above? So here the tax returns was going from 200 to 500 to 800 tax returns. So the number of tax returns that we are assuming are produced in March is continuing to increase. And as we see, the impact on the cost per unit is $19, $13 to $11.50. So we see that as the number of tax returns increases, the cost per unit decreased. Again, 200 to 500 to 800 tax returns, the number of tax returns is increasing, going from $19 per tax return, $13 per tax return to $11.50 per tax return. The cost per unit is decreasing. So why is that? Well, looking at our calculations, the total cost here is decreasing. Well, the total cost is decreasing as we are multiplying by a larger number of tax returns. And we're dividing by a larger number of tax returns here in the cost per unit. So as the denominator increases, we're going to have a smaller cost per unit. As the total cost increases, we're also going to have an increase in total cost in total. However, what we find is that in the numerator, the fixed cost is exactly the same regardless of the number of tax returns produced. So the numerator is adding a fixed cost component within total cost, and the denominator is continuing to increase. Therefore, the cost per unit continues to decrease in Part B. Part C, the owner of Flattery Accounting Services wants to earn a margin excluding any other direct costs on tax returns of $15,000 during the month of March. If 200 returns are prepared, what tax return preparation fee must be charged? Well, we know what the cost for 200 returns is, and we can use that to guide our calculations for the amount to charge per tax return. So here we're assuming 200 tax returns are going to be prepared. And in that case, we have a calculation up in Part A. So the total cost is going to be $3,800, and our cost per unit is $19 per unit. So let's go ahead and use that $19 per unit in Part C. So it costs us $19 per tax return to prepare those tax returns, and now we have a margin that we need to add to that to come up with the fee that we should charge our clients per tax return. So we have $15,000. Well, we don't want that to be a per tax return amount. We need to come up with that $15,000 as of the number of tax returns. So the $15,000 divided by the number of tax returns will get us an amount to charge per tax return. So $15,000 in total is going to be our profit for March. We divide that over the number of returns that we expect to prepare during that month. That is 200. So together, 15,000 divided by 200 tax returns is going to be our margin per tax return. And finally, when we add the $19 per tax return, we come up with the amount that we plan on charging our clients for those tax returns. That is $94 per tax return. Finally, if that fee is charged and 800 returns are prepared, what is the margin in March? Well, we are charging $94 per tax return, and we have prepared 800 tax returns. So we come up with our total sales, and that is $75,200. And if we're looking at our costs associated with that to come up with the margin, we have to subtract our costs, and our costs are related to 200 units. Or I'm sorry, our costs are related to 800 units that are prepared. So we can go up to part 3 here. 800 units, we know that the total cost is going to be $9,200. So we can subtract the $9,200, which is our total cost for producing those units. And we come up with our margin. That is $66,000 profit for part C. For part C, we have $94,000, and then finally we have a $66,000 profit if we were to charge $94 per tax return and prepare 800 returns. Our profit would be $66,000. If you have any questions on Chapter 2, Exercise 16, please let me know.